Hi, I'm James Lamont, Director of the Bedeen Center for Rural Economic Development at the University of Minnesota at Crookston. I would like to welcome you today to our supply chain series. Today we're going to talk about creating a more resilient Midwest. Climate change, tariffs, pandemics. The last several years have been very difficult for us. So, how do you prepare your respective business for disruption? First of all, you need to understand new risks. What are the likely and most catastrophic scenarios that your farm, your production facility, etc., may encounter? Having a good understanding of risk and then creating risk mitigation practices, especially within the realm of most likely scenarios, is in your best interest, of course. Second, are there regenerative practices that you could institute today, whether it's within your respective soils, the types of products that you use to help with production, whether it's the implements that you're utilizing, you name it. What are you doing effectively to ensure that everything is regenerative and you're able to more or less weather an economic impact or some type of supply chain disruption? Third, we're also starting to see at the local level, people are getting very smart about not depending on bigger programs. So as a result, they're looking at financial incentives to incorporate locally sustainable practice adoption. This way, you're more competitive with respect to pursuing soil health, water quality, climate mitigation issues, exposure to other risks, etc. This isn't necessarily a political statement. This is a reality based on environmental, social, and corporate governance standards, the evolving markets with respect to demand, and the increasing likelihood of experiencing natural disasters or pestilence. As a result, to ensure continued farming growth, for one, you're going to want to increase your value added production. Raw materials are by far the most problematic when it comes to exposure to risk. If you have a way to add value locally, you then have more control over your own basis. Second, value chain modernization. We've invested a lot in the United States recently in terms of creating bigger and better clusters within value chains, and your farm or production facility should be a bigger and better part of that as well. Third, we talked about environmental, social, and corporate governance. Take a hard look at those standards. There are 140 metrics that people are waiting to grade you on as to whether or not they're going to buy your product or they're going to lend you money or invest equity into your enterprise. And then lastly, keep a very close eye on shifts in global demand because there are good 10, 15, 20-year projections in terms of where populations are growing, where incomes are changing, et cetera, so that you can get a feel for where you need to start marketing your product today. So take a hard look at this series. I believe there are a number of value-added discussion points for you. And if you have any questions about growing your business, the University of Minnesota Crookston Bedeen Center would like to help you become more entrepreneurial, especially in a rural environment. Hi, I'd like to welcome you to the University of Minnesota Supply Chain Series. It's brought to you by the Agricultural Marketing Center in Iowa. I would like to welcome Bob Sinner, President, SB&B Foods, Jay Schuler, Chair of the District Export Council, and Drew Combs, Executive Director of the North Dakota Trade Office. Today, we're going to be talking about supply chains and how container shortages are impacting producers and processors throughout the upper Midwest. Thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be with you.
Thank you.
Nice to be there.
Thank you. So, Bob, given your experience, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. How are container shortages globally impacting your company?
Well, how much time do we have, James? This is a big issue for us, particularly for customers in Southeast Asia that don't have the ability to carry inventory. High temperatures, high humidities. We're shipping food grade soybeans to soy food companies, and so if you can't stay reliable with shipments, whether it's canceled bookings or not having enough container equipment, it affects the customers. In some cases, through this pandemic, customers have had to shut down because we just haven't been able to be timely with our shipments.
Thank you. Jay, how about you from the council that you represent, as well as maybe some of your business interests? How is this shortage impacting you?
I think, Bob said it well. And, the issue of us being in the upper Midwest, whether it be North Dakota, South Dakota, or Minnesota, we produce more than we consume. So we need to export, whether it's to other parts of the US or overseas. And, so these companies and even, commerce in the various states works together with companies to increase exports. Well, we get exports going, and then we have, situations like we do, and it's really setting the growth of these exporting companies, as well as the growth of exports for the state back, which it will take years to overcome, because all of a sudden it's kind of like an embargo. It's almost like we are not a reliable supplier. In reality, the companies are reliable suppliers. They got the product ready to go. Customer needs it, but the shelves will be empty in Asia. And it's a very sad situation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jay. Drew, coming from the companies that you represent as the director of the trade office, are you hearing similar things or anything different regarding the container shortage?
Absolutely, and I'll echo what the other two panelists said about the issue. Our companies, one in particular that has a perishable product, I mean, it's they need to get it there on time, and because of the container shortage, they're just not going to be able to fulfill that order the way they normally would. To satisfy the customer, understand that they're crating it up and putting on an airplane and just taking a loss, so they don't lose that customer. But it's not just the agriculture side either. It's anything that's produced in the region that you containerize and ship to a customer. We're just seeing that shortage all across the board with various industries.
Thank you, Drew. Bob, I'm going to go back to you. How can a company become creative in this space, given containers are effectively a fixed asset? So, they move everywhere, but it's what could you do at your level, or is there anything that folks could be doing, in your opinion, to mitigate their exposure to risk as a result of these supply chain challenges they're experiencing?
Well, first, James, for us to export, we have to have a container that has come into the country by import. Imports that come in are headed for large metropolitan areas like the Chicagos, like the New Yorks, like Kansas City. Exports come out of rural America. So we have, in our particular region of the Midwest, we have a chronic issue of container shortage. And so what needs to happen? Number one, imports that come into this country are consumable items. They're not heavy. And so in most cases, they're coming in by 40-foot containers. The demand for exports, because of the weight of exports in terms of the commodities that we're shipping, food grade soybeans, it's easy to maximize the weight in a 20-foot container because 40-foot containers are more expensive. So number one, what we're trying to do is to convince a lot of our customers that they need to start looking at using 40-foot containers. That's challenging for a lot of customers because of the space in a lot of the countries in Asia. Number two, if you're shipping it bulk in container, they don't have the infrastructure to unload a 40-foot container. Or even if it's bagged in a 40-foot container, they don't have those capabilities. So we're doing a lot of different things. The other thing that we're doing is, if you think about LA Long Beach, LA Long Beach has 5 times the imports that they have exports. So they have a glut of containers. It's tough to get containers from LA Long Beach into Minneapolis. But the closest rail line is called the Union Pacific. And there's an access point that we're looking at and working with Union Pacific officials to see if we can figure out a way to relocate those containers from LA Long Beach into the inner parts of the country to improve the access for rural America to adequate supply.
Thank you, Bob. Jay, what about you? What are you hearing, or it's in terms of creativity to try to get around this?
Well, the sad part about the whole situation is a lot of these trains. I mean, we've got two Class 1 railroads that cut across North Dakota, and they're both carrying containers that are empty and going back to Asia. And almost every exporter has had contracts to export their products in 20-foot containers, and those contracts have been canceled or just dropped. I mean, I'm not sure of the legality of it, but you have a contract, you're supposed to deliver the container, and the containers are there, but the shipping companies are making more money bringing it back empty and filling it up. So we're losers. And like I stated at the beginning, we're losing our credibility as exporters. I mean, what I'd like to see, and this is really far reaching, but I'd like to see a tax on empty containers going back to Asia, running through our state. They're using up our rail and our space. I'd like to see them, if they're empty, I'd like to see them taxed, because we have enough product here to fill them all up. And like Bob said, they want to go to the big populated areas, but there's no reason, they're already coming through our state. There's no reason they can't have an intermodal location in eastern North Dakota and stop, fill them up, and we're efficient as exporters of turning these containers over. And there needs to be a coming to Jesus meeting with the respective people, in my opinion.
Thank you, Jay. Drew, are you hearing anything from others in the trade community?
So, of course, this is a big issue, and one of the things that the trade office has been doing, of course, we're talking about the issue. Matter of fact, me and Mr. Center have had a few conversations on this topic, and we're trying to partner with organizations in that space to address the issue. We've also reached out to our congressional delegations and asked for their assistance and their help on this issue. But one of the recent events that I find interesting is that now we're being contacted by our customers, those folks over in Asia that are also complaining that why is our containers coming back empty? Because let's face it, the Midwest, upper Midwest is one of the bread baskets of the world. And our agriculture products are well known across the globe, and everyone's got to eat. And they're interested in North Dakota products and Midwestern products. And so it's hampering those customers over in Asia as well. So I think if we can get a dialogue with not only our folks, but our customers, and push some of these steamship companies and container companies to help us out with this problem, I think we could probably get some momentum going on correcting the issue.
James, I just want to make another point to this. A lot of the exporters have carrier agreements with ocean carriers. And last fall, when the carriers realized, like Jay mentioned, there's the demand for imports into our country because of the pandemic has been slowing down, and all of a sudden businesses are ramping up again, and the flood of imports, everybody wants more imports. The carriers recognize that they can make more money by getting those containers back overseas and as quickly as possible getting on imports. So they just basically said, you know what, we don't see a value in loading these containers at exports. It takes time. We have to stop at a ramp, we have to get it back overseas, and then free time, and it takes a customer overseas to unload those containers for a week to two, and we can't get it back into the system for it can waste an entire trip. So we want to get these containers back overseas empty. Well, this became so obvious to many exporters, the Federal Maritime Commission was asked to do an investigation. And oh, by the way, Federal Maritime Commission, please do this investigation in a few weeks, not a few months. Well, that was in October. They announced around the middle of December or November that they were going to do this investigation. Well, here we are, the middle of May. 6 months later, no resolve. Letters have gone to members of Congress. Letters have gone to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and nothing has changed. And so it's been a very frustrating thing for exporters that we've got this activity still going on. As Jay said, empty containers going right by us and not stopping to be filled.
Well, thank you for that insight. It's highly problematic, and this is a good segue into the last question of the panel, Bob. How long do you think it will be before the situation stabilizes, based on what you're hearing, what you're experiencing, et cetera?
Well, this seems to be a moving target. When this started to occur last fall, they said, well, we think this is going to improve by February. Then you got to January, and pretty soon it was going to be April, May. Then you got to March and April, and pretty soon it's going to be the end of summer. And you still see some ocean carriers are saying, well, I think we're going to see some improvements by the end of the summer. And I kind of believe that might be the case. Exports generally slow down, especially agricultural exports start slowing down in the summer months, while the imports of consumable items for Christmas and holiday season start ramping up. Well, we're not going to have to be able to ramp. I mean, we're not going to, it's not like we're not ramped up for imports. Every ship coming into this country, and even though they're in line waiting to be unloaded, every one is chock full of imports. You try to go order a bicycle or some other consumable items, people have to wait a long time. Consumers are frustrated with the shortage of imports. But eventually we're going to start replenishing our pipeline. How long that takes is somewhat of a guess, but you get ocean carriers say this is going to improve by the end of the summer. Others say it's going to go into the end of the year. It's always those first 3 months of the year, because we're past the holidays, imports generally slow down. It's always that first quarter of the year where we struggle for containers. It's getting maybe just a hair better. It's still not where we need to be.
Thank you, Bob. Jay, what do you think? When might this situation stabilize?
Yeah, Bob is a lot, closer his ear to the ground on the subject that I am. But the concern is, even when it gets better, and it will. I mean, supply and demand evens things out. But the crucial problem is what was mentioned earlier. They go to Minneapolis, Chicago, to Kansas City, and yet they come empty through our backyard. And somehow we have to get a program that works. And I mentioned, and I'm an anti-tax guy, but we tax cars for use of our road. We should be taxing these empty containers going across here, because they're hurting us. And I think the long-term solution, we need to identify what that is. And we need to have an intermodal location here. Some of these companies started because there was intermodal just across the river in Dilworth, and that got closed down by the BNSF, and that just kind of happened overnight. They decided, boom, it's done. We need a longer-term solution. And otherwise we'll just be the commodity companies that loads the big trains of bulk soybeans and bulk corn and goes to the West Coast.
Thank you, Jay. And Drew, you want to give us your perspective?
Sure. And I do agree with Bob that I think the container shortage is getting worked out. I understand that those folks that actually make containers are working triple and quadruple shifts to build more containers, and things are being worked out to like was mentioned, stop those containers in the Midwest, to let them get filled up and not just send back empties. But, you know, I think the current global situation with COVID, and there's all kinds of extra issues in the logistics space. And you know, I think the container shortage being a simple or a symptom of that. You know, it's like you know, throwing a rock in a pond and you get that ripple effect. And, you know, my personal opinion is we're closer to that rock that made those ripples. So we're cresting one of those waves, so to speak, that's closer to the center there. And personally, I don't see it happening this year. And I hope things get better in the following years. And, you know, one of my biggest hopes is that, you know, the industry, our policymakers, our thinkers are studying the current issues that's come from the supply chain issues because of COVID and other things. And I hope that they're working on ways not just to mitigate the problem, but also to improve it. You know, and thinking long term. And you know, of course, we can't plan on ships getting stuck in the Suez Canal and that sort of thing. But I think we can take a lesson from that and learn from that lesson and how to mitigate not only COVID, but other logistical problems that come up.
Well, thank you, Drew, and thank all three of you for providing your perspective on today's panel regarding supply chains and the container shortage.